I guess that if you're lucky enough to raise your Series A, it's the money that you raise in order to continue to make mistakes and hopefully to learn something from the mistakes until you get to the next point.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. Today, we're joined by Asi Sharabi, the co-founder and CEO of Wonderbly, the world's leading personalised publishing company. I'm sure any parents listening to this will have come across Wonderbly and their amazing personalised children's books. Founded in 2012, Wonderbly is on a mission to make everyone feel loved and inspired through meaningful personalisation and connect the world through books given as gifts. Over the last decade, Asi and the team have gone from strength to strength, raising money from some of the biggest investors in the industry and winning multiple awards, including Children's Publisher of the Year at the 2021 British Book Awards. To date, the team has grown to over 70 employees, and they've shipped well over 10 million books to over 150 countries. And it's fair to say they're far from being done. Wonderbly has had not one, but two successful exits to date. First in 2021, when they partnered with a mid-market private equity firm, Graphite Capital, and more recently, they found their permanent home as they were acquired by Penguin Random House, the world's biggest publishing company. I'm so excited to dig into his incredible journey and welcome Asi to the show today. So a big welcome to 40-Minute Mentor. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. I can't wait to hear all about the business and your career. But before we dive into that, we're going to warm you up with a few quick fire questions. So please finish the following sentences after me. Question 1, the moment that defined my career was when?
I guess that had to be when my then 3-year-old daughter received a personalized book for her birthday.
Okay, fantastic. The biggest lesson I've learned about leadership is?
Hire the best people you can and just get out of their way.
Brilliant mantra, something I am a big believer in given what we do as a day job. A skill I wish I had mastered earlier in my career is?
Focus and prioritization.
Yes, I can relate to that one for sure. I do get distracted somewhat. I find that's the case for quite a few people that have come on this show. It's that entrepreneurial mind. There's always so many ideas floating around. And if I could change one thing about how companies build teams, it would be
the need for recruitment agencies.
Fair enough. Well, we might have to debate that one another time, but it would be, I guess it would be great if we didn't need it.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely not on the kind of, executive headhunting side of things. It's more the everything below. It's more the,
yes.
This is where I find most of the struggle. Sorry.
No. I mean, look, one of the reasons I started JBM was that I was so fed up of the recruitment industry kind of being lumped in the same bucket as a lot of the slightly more nefarious types that make this industry so transactional. And I'm pleased to say that in the search world, I find that there are some really good ones and much more relationship driven, much more consultative, less salesy. But anyway, that's probably a whole podcast topic. But thank you for being so honest.
Exactly.
Well, I appreciate those already insights into, and we sort of teased the audience a bit with the origin story of Wonderbly. But do you mind sharing a bit about what your upbringing was like and ultimately what brought you to London?
Well, I guess I had a pretty uneventful, perfectly normal and mostly happy childhood. Growing up in a small city in Israel, just outside of Tel Aviv. I arrived to London after my first degree. I think I was about 28, let's say 26 maybe. I came to do my master's here, originally just for, I was supposed to be here just for a year. That master then somehow evolved to another 5 years of PhD at the London School of Economics. And then 25 years later, we're still here in London and we're having this conversation.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad you're here because we wouldn't, if not, Wonderbly probably wouldn't have come to existence and wouldn't have inspired so many kids. So it's a good thing. I'm always interested with entrepreneurs where that kind of spirit comes from. Was that something that's just ingrained within you or from your family? Tell us a bit about that. And I guess our audience would also love to know sort of how Wonderbly came to be.
I never really thought myself of as an entrepreneur, but I guess I fit the description. My mother recently reminded me that when I was about 10, I took some of myself and more of my sister's precious toys, and obviously without permission, and set up a garage sale on our street one day. Wonderbly, as we'll get to it soon, it was a bit of a happy accident, but at the same time, it was a happy accident that in so many ways was meant to be. I guess, if you track the past, my dad always worked for himself. He had a business, still working. And I guess that, if you grow up in Tel Aviv in the kind of social circles that I have, half the people that work in startups and half of them are founders. And so, it's a very entrepreneurial culture in a way. So I guess that the context was there, just waiting to happen in one form or shape or another.
Got it. And I think I read that Wonderbly started as a DIY project with friends in 2012. So do you mind telling us more about that origin story? How did that idea come to be?
I don't want to dwell too much on the Genesis story because it's, I told it many, many, many times over the past years. But, my first daughter, as I alluded when she was 3, she received a gift with the name on it from her uncle and auntie. I was completely unaware of the category of personalized books, never seen one before. But as the story goes, it was pretty lame and underwhelming. So I called a few friends, and we sat around my kitchen table and we agreed that we can do something much, much better than that. And the rest is history. So yeah, it did start as a side project between friends, but very quickly it grew up to be a VC-backed business and all the way to where we are now.
But yeah, amazing how these things come from just that one moment and an incredible business was born. When you start something that has potential, there are so many great ideas that have potential but never turn into anything. So what was the moment you went, I'm going to go all in on this? And what were the early signs that you were really onto something very special?
So I think that the moment that we said, let's just do it. And, surely we can do something better than that. And, in some ways we were looking, we had quite demanding full-time jobs and very young and early families at that time. But I guess we just couldn't ignore this book and the fact that, we saw something with huge potential, but just genuinely really badly executed. And so we just started to work on it as a side project, early mornings, late nights, a little bit of time during the weekends. But it was very much a startup side project rather than, there was the element of, there was the creative element and the creative brief of, can we make a personalized book that doesn't suck? That was the kind of, the original brief. But very, very early on, we realized that other than the creative challenge, there's actually quite a lot of operational, technical, technological, marketing, and a whole array of challenges that comes with some kind of a direct to customer operation, and one which involved print on demand and, going from digital to physical. And so very, very quickly, even at the mindset of a side project, we saw that it's actually quite a complex, interdisciplinary endeavor, which was just super, super exciting. And so we worked on it for over a year, maybe a year and a half before we put it in the market. And the approach was very much a lean startup approach. It was a little lean startup side project, a very kind of creative element to it from an editorial storytelling art point of view. But it wasn't just a pure creative endeavor as a side project. We were hoping that something interesting would happen from a business point of view. And we put it there on the first holiday season, and we bootstrapped to about $1 million in revenue. And that was the moment. It was like, okay, we're onto something. This is really interesting. And then that was the point that we decided after 2013, early in 2014, we decided to park our day jobs, take a small seed round, and just start to build a company around that little project that's gone horribly well.
Yeah, that's a lovely problem to have, isn't it? What were some of the sort of harder parts of that earlier scaling journey? What were some of the challenges you had to overcome? And are there any things you wish you'd have done differently?
I guess generally for me, fairly early on, I've consciously and intentionally adopted a no regrets mindset. Because if you keep thinking about, oh, I could have done that, I should have done that, because it's constantly the case that you think that you know what you're doing, you actually don't know what you're doing, and then you realize that you should have done something else. This is in 90% of the cases. And so I think that the early days, as I'm sure any founder that experienced this kind of hyper growth stage of something that you found a product market fit and things are going well. So it's just beautifully chaotic, I guess is the right way to describe it. but a lot of fun. It was also a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I think that's often when you know you're in the right world is when it is hard and lots of things are going wrong, but you're still enjoying it because that's part of what being an entrepreneur is. It's the build. It's you got to go through the hard yards, don't you? We briefly touched upon the fact that you ultimately got to this point where you raised a seed round and you've gone on to raise some incredible investors. So it's something that comes up a lot on this podcast because we know how challenging fundraising can be. What was the experience like for you? And what would you say are the biggest lessons that you learned and sort of advice you would pass on to maybe founders listening to this that might be sort of doing it for the first time, maybe struggling with it? What were your learnings and takeaways?
I actually enjoyed fundraising. It was one of the things that I really like to do. And I've gone through 3 rounds, seed, A, and B. And for me, the first 2 rounds were fairly easy. And anyone who's listening to it, I'm doing the quote unquote kind of thing. But again, in hindsight, I got to meet a lot of people. And in the early days, we had such a strong traction that getting money was not an issue. It was actually getting money from the right people that was on my mind. The B round was a very different story, very different experience. We were just kind of heading properly into what you can call the messy middle. If anyone read Scott Belsky's book, and it was very close to just taking some kind of a down round, I guess, which fortunately we end up not having. But so I had a first two fairly straightforward, one that was much more challenging, but eventually we managed to get there. And then a year later, I decided I'm not doing it anymore. I'm shifting the business to sustainability, profitability, and not going on that road again. And that was probably the second, you asked me earlier, what was the moment that defined your career? The second one would probably be to shift the business to profitability and taking back ownership of our destiny.
Okay, really interesting. And I guess you've won many awards. You've obviously raised these great rounds. You appeared on Dragon's Den, which is actually, we've had a few Dragon's Den guests come on the podcast, which I'm sure was a unique experience. What for you were the real standout moments for you and why?
I guess it has to be winning the Children Publisher of the Year, because from day one, we obsessed about proving to ourselves and the world that personalized book can be as good as any off-the-shelf book that you can buy in a bookstore, sorry. Because when we started it, personalized book, rightly so, had a quite bad reputation, just being a bit of a tacky novelty gift and not much more than that. And so we wanted to prove that there can be real products of literature or real books. And so, getting this accolade from a fairly snobbish British publishing establishment was a big moment for me. And, I think for all of us in the team, I think it's fair to, in hindsight, kind of, reflecting on those years, I can describe our relationship with the traditional publishing as something like first they ignore you, then they snub you, then they invite you to give keynotes in their innovation conferences. Then they give you the awards. Then finally they acquire. So I think we've completed a full circle, and we are now part of the big publishing industry. And I could not be happier and prouder.
Amazing. Well, you should be. It must be incredibly proud for you and the team to kind of look back on all the things you've achieved, and but
Absolutely.
also given you're still doing incredible work, which I can't wait to come on to hear about the future as well. One of the topics that I'm most passionate about is sort of building high performing teams, culture, all of those things, and that's what I'd love to talk to you about because I know it's a topic that you're passionate about and very good at building high performing teams. So I guess what was your approach firstly to hiring in the early days of Wonderbly, and how has that evolved as the years have gone on?
There was no magic formula, and a lot of mistakes were made, definitely in the early years of VC-backed hypergrowth. But again, no regrets. But I guess that if you're lucky enough to raise your Series A, it's the money that you raise in order to continue to make mistakes and hopefully to learn something from the mistakes until you get to the next point. We tried agencies, we tried to source internally, we worked with talent partners that came in and embedded themselves in the building, etc., etc. We tried cheap, we tried expensive, we tried 7 stages of hiring, and I did a lot of just gut feel, you hire on the spot kind of. I don't know, at the end of the day, honestly, I'd say it's at least 50% luck, and the rest is a combination of having a really rigorous process culture that you know what you're optimizing for, and understanding good intuition.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's almost a rite of passage to make mistakes when it comes to hiring. No one's ever going to get it perfect. And I think one shouldn't beat themselves up too much, because you actually learn a lot from the mistakes you make when it comes to hiring. And I think if you can learn something from each process and then sort of refine that, because it will evolve all the time depending on, the scale of the business and different challenges you face. What was the most difficult hire that you had to make to date? And why was it so challenging?
I think in the early days, for me personally, it's probably been marketing leadership. And then later, more kind of, I guess, recently, it was people leadership. Actually, come to think of it, could it be that these two areas of the business that are really closest to my heart and my skill set?
Your expectations are super high.
I guess so. Like these two are not, honestly, just reflecting on it for a second, these are the two things that I like to do and know something about. And yeah, I guess that's, finding the people, because I have absolutely no problem whatsoever. I'm really not this like centralized founder or, CEO that likes to keep everything and like to be hands-on. Absolutely not, the opposite actually. But I guess it's with marketing and people marketing in the early days. And, until we find the right people, which luckily have been with me for, a good few years now. But yeah, that was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's not the first time I've heard that. Well, one, marketing is often a very challenging hire anyway. But I think particularly if it's something you spike on, you will naturally be pickier and, want to get it really, really right, because it's something you're close to. And the same goes for people. And actually, people is such a strategic, I think often was not seen as this, but actually so important to get that people leader right. And you really want somebody that can be that cultural beacon and somebody you can really trust and rely on. So yeah, you want to get that one right, of course. I'd love to learn more about the culture that you've built at Wonderbly. How would you describe it? And as you've scaled, how has it evolved? Would love to know if those fundamentals are still the same or if it's sort of changed as you've grown.
Yeah, culture, that abstract, elusive, yet also important ingredient. I can talk about culture for a whole hour if you have the time. We've got a team that's as diverse as our books and storylines: writers, engineers, designers, marketing people, CRM, PR, illustrators, product managers, finance people, of course, our deeply caring customer support angels, operations, content managers. I'm probably forgetting people, of course, HR, translators, analysts, producers, of course, office manager. And I think that, it's a really wonderful bunch of makers and dreamers. And these are people who are equally obsessed about the craft as well as Wonder's mission. And I guess that what I really enjoyed and feel like I had the immense privilege over the years is seeing just how each person found kind of their own personal way to connect to our mission and to manifest our values, which is, one lens to look at the Wannabe culture, and to manifest those values, into their own kind of work in a quite personal way. And, so these are courage, curiosity, and kindness. These are one of his values, and they have been there pretty much from day one. And it's this idea of having the courage, and having is not either have it or not. It's cultivating the courage to try things that no one else would, for setting yourself insanely ambitious goals, and for being willing to be wrong and fail most of the time. We are, at the end of the day, operating in a bit of a hit and miss industry. We have more books that didn't become global bestsellers than those who did. And we've always trailblazed the whole category. Yes, we didn't invent the category, it's been around for many years, but no one did it with the same obsession and care and uncompromising approach to quality that we did. And no one innovated in this category as much as we were lucky to do. So you need a lot of courage to do that. The other side of that coin, I guess, is curiosity, because that's what keeps us wondering and wondering, just being always open and curious about finding new ways to make meaningful connections and magical stories. And I think that you have to have this curious mind, beginner's mind, learning mind, which is very important. And then finally, kindness won't bell that, at the end of the day, only kindness matters. And so it's being kind to your colleagues, it's being kind to your customers. Other people matter is what I keep telling anyone who cares to listen.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I can really see just but the strength of those values and how it's a great place to work. When you have that combination of people of all different shapes and sizes coming in and but also buying into that, I think it's so powerful.
I guess that beyond that, it probably comes with us being a very interdisciplinary team. So, it's a fairly small team. It's only 70 people, but very, very diverse from from a profession and craft point of view. And that diversity, and I'm using it not in a DEI diversity kind of side of things, just diversity of professions, and just brings with it, there's a lot to work with. And you need to find the common ground between very different characters and personalities and ways of working. And I think that it could make things difficult in some ways, but also this is the reason why we thrive and have a quite multifaceted kind of culture. On one hand, it's a very, very high performing, high output organization. On the other hand, if you will walk around the business, it's also I'd like to believe, and I have all reasons to believe, that it's a very pleasant and pretty relaxed kind of environment. There's a lot of support here, a lot of friendships been made over the years, deep, deep friendships. And there's a lot of, I think that sometimes high performing team and high output comes with something quite harsh. I think that in Wonderbly, it's a very happy place. And we've been mindful of both in a way, in equal measures.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess when you're interviewing for candidates to come work at Wonderbly, and I'm sure there'll be people listening to this thinking, I want to work in that type of culture. So what helps candidates stand out to you? And on the flip side, what are the red flags, particularly when it comes to that cultural alignment, that kind of are really off-putting?
I don't know, maybe saying the bleeding obvious here, but candidates and then hires that stand out and having a very good, meaningful career, just people who are genuinely and deeply passionate about their profession, about the craft, about the work that they do. It really, really helps if you're passionate about books, working at Wonderbly. So being obsessed about your craft as well as books is in equal measures is a good starting point. I guess that kind of jumping back to the people or walking backwards, looking at the people who had an amazing career here at Wonderbly, who still have, they're prolific, they are tenacious, ambitious, and they thrive on autonomy, which are things that, over the years, I think we've learned to intuitively spot. It's very, very hard to ask in an interview, or are you being prolific? But because it does. We need people who can just process a lot of information, and it's incredible to see that some people have the just natural talent of processing tons of information, being incredibly prolific, and some people are simply not. I sit somewhere in the middle. I'm definitely far from being the most prolific person in the building. But early on, I learned to genuinely appreciate that trait and try to find ways to optimize for that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing. Like many companies, Wonderbly was a more in-office culture before the pandemic and now is a hybrid model. So how has your mind changed to that, like the impact of in-office versus hybrid? And how has it helped or hindered you in terms of attracting and retaining talent, sort of adopting a hybrid model?
That's a great question. Look, I think that maybe in some interview in the past, I said before the pandemic, I said something about, and I can, I think it simply comes to personal preference. And I just love people. I just love being around smart people.
Yeah, me too.
That stimulate me and do amazing things and amazing work. And I do, more specifically for Wonderbly, I do believe that creativity thrives on collaboration, that human interaction breeds creativity in a wonderful and serendipitous kind of ways, which in some ways tends to happen outside of formal workshops and brainstorms. And one can argue that yes, some things can happen over Zoom, but I guess that fast forward to where we are post pandemic, 2 3 years at least after that, if I believe in anything, it's probably that a hybrid model where you can be very mindful and specific about the type of work and interactions that can only benefit or can only happen and benefit from working remotely, as well as, of course, in the office, and then create a model that makes the best use of both worlds. Because I think that, after the pandemic, I think that the whole world learned that we don't have to be 5 days in the office. Good things can happen to companies that are having a bit more flexible, I guess, in the one hand. Even if I was more vocal against remote, I was always probably very vocal about, positively vocal about flexible, and about giving people the way to do the work around the things that matter to them most, and where they find that they can do the best work. Because I think that there's a difference between flexible and remote. But flexible doesn't have to be remote. And so, as a natural kind of post-COVID evolution, first we were forced to work completely remotely for a year. And I think after the initial couple of weeks of shock, I'd say because of the strength of the Wonderbly culture, we were able to preserve the kind of the culture, the high performing team, the high output, the sense of belonging, even when we did have to work fully remote. So, we adapted very well. But then when we could go back to the office, it was clear that the days of full 5 days in the office are over, and we should cater for something that is, we should continue to evolve our operating system or our operating model. And at the moment, we're doing 3 days a week in the office and 2 remote. But of course, anyone can come to I'm here 5 days a week because I have a very easy commute now. And so it's a minimum 3 days. And it's working.
Yeah, that's great. I find that's often the sort of structure a lot of our clients are adopting, and it seems to be working well. So that's great to hear. We've spent a lot of time reflecting on the journey and all the learnings and all the great things that have happened over the last few years. But I'd love to also ask about the future. What are the plans for Wonderbly in the years ahead?
So we just started our next chapter. I don't know, probably 4th chapter. We have joined the biggest publishing group in the world. As I said, I could not be happier. I think that, over the years, Wonderbly became closer and closer to the publishing world, while, retained our kind of early stage startup, techie kind of vibes. But, from an editorial point of view, from understanding customers, from the point of view of creating products and books that people want to buy, are making deeply meaningful connections between people. And with our approach to international expansion and this idea of a meaningfully personalized book for every age, every occasion, every relationship, we want to put a Wonderly book on every bookshelf in the world. And so being a part of the world's largest publishing group is coming with a lot of benefits, which we're still, it's a very, very early stage. We closed the deal in July, and then we broke into the summer. So it is very, very fresh, and we're still learning. And I was very, very excited when the global CFO of PRH, who was part of the team that were instrumental in this deal, told me that it's his personal mission to make PRH, Penguin Random House, by the way, the most attractive environment to entrepreneurs doing new things in publishing. And they're not looking to consolidate or to merge us or to put us into some kind of box. It's like, acquired you so we can just enable you and watch you continue to do what you've been doing in the past 10 years and just tell us how we can help. And that was obviously like, music to my ears, because as an entrepreneur, you've got two, I guess, existential anxieties. The first one, if you're lucky enough to find product market fit and to be on the road and to, start the journey, your first existential anxiety is to not fuck it up. And to, definitely once you took out money from investors, you're just constantly anxious about not fucking it up and to get some kind of a meaningful outcome for all shareholders. And then again, if you are as unbelievably lucky as I feel that I am, and you manage to have a very positive outcome, and you found a permanent home, and you exited the company to a huge group, that anxiety immediately transforms itself to, oh my God, what can happen now that I'm part of a $5 billion publishing group, and what will happen to Wonderbly, and what will happen to our culture, and what will happen to everything that we worked so hard to build. But there's, I think that I've always worked from intuition, and if there's one thing that I'm allowing myself to take credit for is about bringing in the right people, the right investors along the way, and board members, and working with private equity for 4 years before that. So I do think that we couldn't be more luckier and happier with PRH. It's absolutely great leadership. Their intentions are genuinely to see how they can help us to continue to grow.
That's an amazing to hear, and again, many congratulations. It's an incredible outcome, and it sounds like the potential is huge. So, very wishing you all the very best with the future. Before we get to our wrap up questions, I just wanted to touch upon entrepreneurship more broadly and being a founder, because it is a hard existence. And a lot of people listening to this may be going through the sort of the brutal parts of the founder journey. And I think you've previously talked about the psychological strain that being a founder can sometimes have, and what a lonely place entrepreneurship
Yeah.
can be. And I felt that I ran my business as a solo founder for 13 years before being acquired and now being a part of a leadership group. And so I know firsthand about that. So I'd love to hear just a bit more about sort of what you have found difficult, especially when you're a new founder, but just sort of what have been the hardest parts of being a founder for you? And how did you overcome those sort of difficult days?
Okay, rolling it back, I guess that is, as we just mentioned, if you find yourself like I did, whether accidental or intentional founder that is running, in our case, the fastest growing startup in the UK, at least in 2016, with all the thrills and pressures and pain that comes with that, I guess it can just be quite overwhelming unless you're a bit of an asshole. And I think that it's just this constant sense that you're completely out of your depth. You're just winging it day after day after day, all day, every day. And I think that for me, in the very early days, it did feel like I just woke up one morning and I have a company with about 80 people and 6 different investors on the board and some kind of an exec team that I'm told I should manage. And everything was just entirely new and change all the time. So you constantly in and out of a sense of control or lack thereof, mostly the latter. And that's, again, you need to be able to operate in that environment. You need to be able to not completely freak out and have a few hours of sleep every night.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any advice for founders in terms of looking after themselves and their well-being, and just sort of maybe people that are starting out, things that you think will be just useful for them to hear from someone that's been there and done it?
I guess honestly, my best advice would be to start on your mindfulness journey as early as possible. That's, I think, is very, very important. Because if you develop and you cultivate a healthy level of self-awareness, I think that can really help, because then you can anticipate things, you know where you are, you can actually, you're not entirely out of control.
Yeah, yeah, totally. No, it's a very good advice. Well, we're sadly at an end, Asi. I've got two final quick questions for you to wrap things up. This is 42-minute mentor, so I have to ask you, if you could be mentored by anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I always really admired a guy called Scott Belsky. I mentioned the Messy Meal book earlier. So Scott Belsky founded, interesting, this guy impacted me and influenced me in different ways along the journey. He doesn't know it. I wish I'd have the opportunity to tell him that one day. But so he founded Behance, that was then later acquired by Adobe, and he became the chief product officer. And other than the fact that I found my creative co-founder, Pedro, on Behance, Scott also wrote 2 books. The first one was Making Ideas Happen, which was a great influence of me of going into that side project. And then he wrote The Messy Middle, which perfectly described those hard, messy, turbulent years that you kind of go in and out of when you're on that scaling journey.
Yeah, it's great. It sounds like a fantastic mentor. And finally, what's one final piece of career advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Try really hard to not be an asshole. Other people matter.
Well said. Well said. I can't think it's succinct and very, very powerful. It's a really good way to live, actually. Yeah, it's something that I think is it's just that shouldn't be overlooked when you're building a business. It just makes for a much, much better environment. So I hope our listeners will take heed, and I'm sure they will also want me to thank you for a brilliant conversation, incredibly inspiring. I'm a huge admirer of what you've built and the business, and I hope many, many more years to come we can enjoy the incredible books that you produce. So thank you so much, and wishing you all the very best.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Asi.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40 Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40 Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.